They always tell the story from the sky first. A strike, a target, a statement. Clean words, clean maps, clear explanations, as if violence in Nigeria can be switched off with a button pressed thousands of miles away. When Donald Trump ordered airstrikes on Nigerian soil, the announcement arrived polished and confident, framed as decisive action against insurgency. But for the people living where those bombs landed, the question was never about precision or power. It was about the aftermath. Because Nigeria is not short on airstrikes, it is short on safety. Villages don't disappear because militants are hit from above. Roads don't become safe because camps are destroyed. Children don't stop fearing nights because foreign drones pass overhead. So before accepting the narrative of success, there is a harder question that must be asked. One that doesn't fit into press releases or political speeches. Did these strikes actually make Nigeria safer? Or did they simply make Washington feel in control? Let's find out. The story began the way these stories usually do, from far away. In Washington, officials confirmed that U.S. forces had carried out airstrikes in northern Nigeria, targeting armed groups linked to the Islamic State. The language was precise and controlled. Targets were identified, operations were coordinated, militants were neutralized. The message was clear. Action had been taken. For Donald Trump, the framing mattered. This was presented as a decisive response to insurgency, proof that the United States was still willing to act forcefully in Africa when threats emerged. It sounded familiar, confident, assertive, and final. But while statements were being read and headlines written, something important was missing from the story. There was no mention of what life looked like on the ground before the strikes. No explanation of how armed groups were able to operate in those areas in the first place. No discussion of what would happen after the jets and drones left Nigerian airspace. Because for people living in northern Nigeria, the strike itself was not the event. The event was what came before. Years of insecurity, weak protection, and communities learning to survive without a reliable state presence. Armed groups didn't appear overnight. They filled gaps. They moved into places where police stations were understaffed, where soldiers rotated in and out, where roads were unsafe, and governance was thin. And this is where the official narrative begins to crack. If airstrikes were the solution, Nigeria's conflict would have ended years ago. Nigerian jets have flown countless missions. Camps have been destroyed before. Leaders have been killed before. Yet the violence has not disappeared. It has shifted, fragmented, and spread. Still, when the U.S. strikes were announced, they were presented as if something fundamentally new had occurred, as if power from the sky could succeed where years of ground failure had not. No one leading the announcement explained how civilians would be protected afterward. No one outlined how villages near the strike zones would be secured from retaliation. No one addressed how trust would be rebuilt in places where people already felt forgotten. Instead, the story stopped at impact. And that's the first problem. Because when a security operation is judged only by what it destroys, and not by what it stabilizes, it tells you something about priorities. It tells you the audience for the story is not the people who live there, but the people watching from elsewhere. For Nigerians, especially those in affected regions, the strike was not an ending. It was a moment inside a much longer pattern, one they have seen repeat too many times to count. Which brings us to the question that the official version carefully avoids. After the bombs fell and the statements were issued, what actually changed for the people living under the threat? Almost nothing changed. That is the honest answer to the question left hanging after the strikes. When the smoke cleared and the official language faded, daily life in northern Nigeria remained exactly what it was before. Dangerous, uncertain, and exposed. The same roads were unsafe. The same villages remained unprotected. The same fear governed movement after sunset. Militant groups did not collapse. They adjusted. Groups are not conventional armies waiting inside permanent bases. They are mobile networks. They disperse when threatened, blend into surrounding terrain and communities, and regroup elsewhere. A destroyed camp does not end their presence. It simply changes their coordinates. That is because the violence is not sustained by buildings or airstrips alone. It is sustained by systems that air power cannot touch. Recruitment driven by desperation, local economies built around extortion and kidnapping, porous borders used for arms trafficking, and communities left to negotiate survival on their own. For people living in those regions, the strike did not signal safety, it signaled uncertainty. When foreign jets appear briefly and then disappear, armed groups often return quietly, later, with questions and punishments. Civilians understand this pattern well. They know that once the attention moves on, they are the ones left to absorb the consequences. This is why many Nigerians do not measure security by the number of militants killed. They measure it by whether they can travel without fear, sleep without listening for engines, and farm without calculating ransom risk. On those measures, the strikes delivered no improvement. In fact, in some cases, they deepen anxiety. Areas associated with strikes can become marked zones, places militants watch more closely, suspecting collaboration even when none exists. Without sustained protection, that suspicion becomes dangerous. So while the strikes may have achieved a short-term tactical effect in the sky, they failed to produce a strategic effect on the ground. They did not alter the balance of power in favor of civilians. They did not restore state presence where it was absent, which leads directly to the next question that cannot be avoided. If airstrikes repeatedly fail to change conditions on the ground, why do leaders keep relying on them as a solution? Because they are the fastest way to look in control without changing anything underneath. That is the real answer. Airstrikes are chosen not because they work best, but because they demand the least from those in power. They do not require rebuilding broken institutions. They do not require confronting corruption inside security forces. They do not require deploying soldiers for months in remote areas where the risks are high and the rewards are invisible. They do not require explaining to citizens why armed groups were allowed to grow in the first place. Fixing Nigeria's security crisis would mean fixing governance where it has collapsed. It would mean protecting villages before attacks happen, not responding afterward. It would mean securing roads permanently, not announcing operations temporarily. It would mean earning civilian trust in places where the state has been absent or abusive. All of that is slow, expensive, politically dangerous work. Airstrikes bypass it. They allow leaders to replace reform with reaction. A jet in the sky becomes a substitute for a functioning state on the ground. Instead of asking why militants operate freely, leaders announce that militants were hit. Instead of explaining failures, they point to explosions. There is also a deeper convenience. Airstrikes shift responsibility upward. When something goes wrong, blame dissolves into intelligence errors, technical limitations, or fog of war. There is no local official held accountable for abandoned villages. No structural failure was examined. The system remains untouched. This is why airstrikes are often framed as decisive moments, even when history shows they are not. They produce images, statements, and numbers, all things that travel well politically. They create the appearance of movement without altering direction. And for foreign leaders, the incentive is even clearer. Airstrikes fit domestic political narratives. They signal toughness. They show reach. They offer a clean, exportable story of action that does not require explaining Nigerian complexity to foreign audiences. Nigeria's conflict, however, is not clean. It is messy, local, and uncomfortable. It involves criminal economies, land disputes, ethnic tensions, state neglect, and decades of broken trust. None of that fits easily into press releases. So airstrikes have become the preferred language. They are easy to explain and hard to question, unless you live there. For people on the ground, the pattern is familiar. Violence escalates. The state reacts from the air. Attention fades. Militants adapt. Civilians pay the price. Then the cycle repeats. Airstrikes are not chosen because leaders believe they will end the conflict. They are chosen because they postpone the harder conversation. Why so many Nigerians feel unprotected, unheard, and expendable. Which brings us to the next uncomfortable issue that must be confronted honestly. If these strikes are not designed around Nigerian realities, then whose expectations are they actually meant to satisfy? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. They are not designed around Nigerian lives. They are designed around external expectations. That is the uncomfortable conclusion once you strip away the language of partnership and cooperation. When airstrikes are announced, the messaging is aimed outward first, at foreign voters, foreign media, and foreign political rivals. Nigeria becomes the setting, not the subject. For Donald Trump, the strikes fit neatly into a familiar political script. They signal toughness. They reduce a complex African security crisis into a single claim. Action was taken against the insurgency. That claim is easy to sell at home. It does not require explaining Nigeria's internal fractures, rural abandonment, or why armed groups keep regenerating. Foreign audiences want clarity. Nigerian reality offers none. This is why the strikes are framed as victories the moment they happen. Success is defined by targets hit, not by communities stabilized. It is defined by what was destroyed, not by what was protected. That framing works politically, especially thousands of miles away, but it collapses under scrutiny on the ground. For Nigerians living in affected regions, the strike is not a reassuring signal. It is a warning. It tells them attention has arrived briefly, violently, and without commitment. They know what comes next. The attention will leave, and they will remain. This is the core mismatch. External audiences consume the event as an endpoint. Local communities experience it as a midpoint, often the most dangerous one. Armed groups rarely respond immediately. They wait, they observe. Then they return, asking who talked, who guided, who benefited. Civilians are left to answer questions they never asked for. The strike, therefore, serves a narrative more than a strategy. It reassures outsiders that something is being done while asking Nigerians to absorb the consequences quietly. It converts insecurity into spectacle and treats African terrain as proof of action rather than lived space. And this is where sovereignty becomes blurred. Yes, Nigeria may approve cooperation. Yes, officials may confirm coordination. But when the logic of security is shaped to satisfy foreign political cycles rather than local protection needs, sovereignty becomes procedural, not practical. The deeper issue is not whether the strike was legal or coordinated. It is whether it was designed with Nigerians as the primary audience. And the evidence points elsewhere. If Nigerian civilians were the priority, the announcement would have included ground protection plans. It would have explained how villages would be secured afterward. It would have addressed retaliation risks and long-term presence. Instead, the story ended where the bombs landed. That silence is revealing, because when security policy speaks loudly to outsiders and quietly to locals, it tells you who it is meant to impress. And in this case, it is not the farmer deciding whether to travel tomorrow. It is not the trader who calculates whether the road is safe. It is not the family listening for engines at night. Which brings us to the next question that can no longer be delayed. If the strikes satisfy foreign politics but leave Nigerians exposed, what actually happens to civilians once the attention moves on? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. They are left alone with the consequences. Once the statements are issued and the cameras move on, life in the affected areas becomes more dangerous, not less. This is the phase that never makes it into official summaries, because it cannot be measured in targets or confirmed kills. Armed groups do not disappear after airstrikes. They return quietly, sometimes days later, sometimes weeks later. They don't come back with convoys or flags. They come back with questions. This is the reality in regions where groups operate. These groups survive not by holding territory permanently, but by controlling fear. Airstrikes do nothing to remove that control. In fact, they often strengthen it. Villages near strike zones become marked. Residents know this. They reduce movement. Markets thin out. Children stop going to school. Farmers abandon land because farming without protection becomes a gamble with death or ransom. What looks like normal life on a map slowly collapses in practice. There is also the problem of retaliation logic. Armed groups understand that civilians have little power to resist them, so punishment is collective. A village becomes a warning to neighboring communities. Cooperation, real or imagined, is discouraged through fear. This is how insurgencies maintain control long after air power has passed. The state, meanwhile, often fails to fill the vacuum. Permanent security deployments are rare. Social services do not follow strikes. Reconstruction is not immediate. In some cases, there is no follow-up at all. The message received by civilians is simple. When danger comes, protection is temporary. When retaliation comes, you are on your own. This is why many communities make survival decisions that outsiders misinterpret. They don't support militants, they adapt to power. When the state is absent and armed groups are present, neutrality becomes impossible. People comply because compliance is safer than resistance. Airstrikes, instead of breaking this cycle, can deepen it. They escalate suspicion. They heighten surveillance by militants. They turn ordinary villagers into perceived intelligence assets. And without visible, sustained protection, the risk calculus shifts against civilians. None of this is accidental. It is the predictable outcome of a strategy that prioritizes spectacle over stability. So when foreign leaders describe these strikes as successes, they are measuring success from the wrong altitude. They are counting damage, not danger. They are evaluating power, not protection. Which brings us to the final question, the one that cuts through every justification and every announcement. If airstrikes leave civilians more exposed than protected, what purpose do they truly serve in Nigeria's security crisis? They serve appearance, not protection. That is the conclusion once everything else is stripped away. When you follow the chain carefully, the strike, the announcement, the silence afterward, the civilian exposure, the purpose becomes clear. These operations are not designed to end Nigeria's insecurity. They are designed to look like control in a situation where real control is absent. This is why the same cycle repeats. Violence rises. Airstrikes follow. Statements are issued. Attention fades. Violence adapts. The cycle is not broken because nothing structural has changed. The strikes operate above the problem, literally and politically. And that leaves Nigeria facing the same unresolved reality it had before the jets arrived. So, how many more times will security be measured by explosions in the sky instead of safety on the ground? Let us know in the comment section. Do you see strikes as success? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.